Mass media in our society is like water. It's all over the world in one form or more, and we all consume it. Now sure, you might get upset by what you see and hear, but it's not a physical force aggravating you. It's a screen, or a page, or a sound, meant to entertain and inform. Watch it and take it in. If you come out a changed or better person, good for you. Every medium has the power to take us all over the world and tell us about something real or imaginary. To think this used to be seen as bad. Novels were once condemned for inspiring others to daydream and change their lives. I know, how unorthodox. But nowadays you don't see people attacking books, do you? And mass media has only taken many forms since. Film aids the news, social media aids text, so it works both ways in our world. So you may wonder, what do I define as retro, and what do others define as retro? In this documentary, I'll have 3 interviewees featured to support or add to my thoughts. The first is Ben, or Benny Boy from the YouTube channel Oddity Archive, whose channel I've been a fan of for many years. He reviews everything from music to outdated technology and unusually strange tapes or broadcasts. And to answer the question of what's with the box, it's his usual setup in his videos. It's fascinating the amount of items he's able to come across.
Well, some of the ones, as I mentioned off-air recording, some of those were ones that I did. And otherwise, it's kind of what you'd expect. Thrift stores, flea markets, garage sales, Craigslist, eBay. It's become more and more eBay, actually, lately, which I'm not really that much of a fan of, but, you know, sometimes you just have to go with it.
Then there's Sarah, who is the professor for my film and literature class. She deals a lot with English classes and the power of writing, but also has an affinity for film and the power of a visual medium.
Both articulate something about the human experience, and in doing so, really, it sounds cheesy, but the idea that it takes us someplace else, and when it comes to film, the idea that it's primarily done through a medium that is visual, whereas with text, that it's done through this arbitrary system of symbols that one can't help but be fascinated by. The fact that words on a page for thousands of years have done so much, and then that someone can take those coded systems and put it into a whole separate set of codes is absolutely fascinating to me.
And there's Dominic, who is my AP literature teacher. He always encouraged annotating text and analyzing it for a hidden meaning, or at least a better understanding of the story and the message the author could have been trying to get across. But even then, everyone finds their own personal conclusion, and he's always open to discussion.
I like how there's never a right answer. I feel like a lot of content areas, teachers are always driving students to find the answer, and with the class that I teach and teaching literary analysis, there just never is one singular answer. So I like that I myself am always open to students changing my mind, altering my perception of the things that we're analyzing. I like that I don't have to guide students only to one conclusion about something that we're reading. So I just like the constant sort of pursuit of multiple meanings that comes with literary analysis.
Not only that, but he also serves as a journalism advisor for the school newspaper, which has since branched out beyond a paper copy. He has since implemented a YouTube channel and a website full of podcasts, side videos, and news programs. And nowadays, with all the technology we have and how much students and teachers alike rely on it, it's an interesting path to take.
The previous crier advisor, Mrs. Reese, stepped down, and so when I heard of the opening, I it didn't initially occur to me that it would be something I'd be interested in, just because of how busy I am with 3 little kids at home, and teaching AP Lit and coaching and all those sorts of things. But the more I thought about it, I did remember. I mean, not that I had forgotten, but I did think back to when I entered college, when I went to the University of Illinois. I started as a journalism major. I've always had, and I've mentioned I love reading, but I love writing. As far as why branch out to things like YouTube videos and podcasts, various broadcasts that we're doing, it's nothing that I have any background in. I'm not able to teach my kids how to broadcast. That's not my background at all, or podcast, or anything like that. But I will rarely say no to a student who expresses an interest in doing things like that. So if a student or students tell me, hey, I would like to experiment with broadcasting, we have the financial means to support that through our budget, and I can buy them equipment that's going to help them. And if they prove to me that they're going to take it serious, then I'm always going to support those students.
Everyone has their own definition depending on what they do or when they were raised, and it's admittedly such a vague term because of that.
My yardstick for Oddity Archive is I always try. I don't always succeed, but I try and only cover things that are no longer a going concern. Their best days are behind them. But if you want to talk retro, for me personally, I'd probably put the cutoff in the early 2000s, maybe. I guess just in terms of my own favor, I would say 2000 and back. And as far back as you want to go.
For the sake of this documentary, I'm only going to focus on media from the mid-20th century to today. None of it may be as significant as the Gutenberg Press or the Telegraph, but they have impacted us as individuals and society as a whole.
Kermit the Frog in The Muppet Show, and that sparked my interest in later in high school wanting to go into theater. Also, as serving that behind the scenes, almost a deconstructivist approach to how the industry works, because in Sesame Street he was also the reporter, and so I loved that about him too, because that was something, I would do little reports of what happened on my street.
I like writing in books. I know people will say, well, you can digitally annotate things now too, but for me, maybe it's just because I'm old-fashioned. I'll always prefer the physical books. If you look around my classroom, there's physical books everywhere. My house is the same way.
Obviously, I work on the internet. I have my favorite fellow YouTubers that I watch, and I watch some stuff on like Amazon Prime, that kind of stuff. But aside from that, let's see, books here. I try to read when I can. If it's research for archive, it oftentimes winds up being e-books. I'll download them to my iPad. But otherwise, if it's more casual, I tend to prefer good old-fashioned paper. I guess I'm just a man at a time. I just always had a thing for it. I couldn't tell you why. When I was a little kid, in the back of the car with my parents, when I was real little, they still were listening to the then current Top 40. But then sometime in probably the early 90s, it became oldies. And on TV back then, I'd watch TV, and TV stations were really plugging the time with old shows, reruns, old movies, Three Stooges shorts, that kind of thing. So if I had to guess, I would say that's where it happened.
Before we go any further, I feel it's important to introduce my background so you can understand where I'm coming from when I share sentiments of mine later on. I was born in 2001. I was born in a time where traditional was still there, but modern was about to take over. Radio was still huge, VCRs were still commonplace technology, and CRT televisions could still be found in millions of households across the country. But right under everybody's noses was this giant bubble of new technology being produced and introduced, and this bubble would be ready to burst in a number of years. As a kid, I was obsessed with media. It was more than a tool to make me shut up for a while. I think about how it was shaped like shows by Blue's Clues. I'd walk around the house with my own handy-dandy notebook trying to search for clues. I even had a white chair that served as my thinking chair. It wasn't a big red couch, but to me it didn't matter. Though I'm not sure a single one of my cases made a lick of sense, it at least got me into searching for the answers to things and getting into cognitive thinking. At the age of 3, no less. Like a lot of kids, I'd watch a lot of Disney films and SpongeBob episodes over and over. However, what I loved just as much as watching the VHS tapes and DVDs was staring and studying the cases of them. I'd memorize the art, the plot, and even the runtime. I'd learn what an hour was after asking my mom what my Madagascar DVD meant when it said it was 1 hour and 26 minutes. I would also be the rare kid that actually wanted to watch disc 2 of my DVDs, aka the bonus material disc. I was genuinely interested in the behind-the-scenes interviews and the process of developing a story and characters and atmosphere. I treated playtime like a 3-act structure plot. My Tonka truck, Legos, and potato heads would usually play a major part. The Toy Story making of featurettes, as well as the film themselves, inspired me in a significant way, showing that you can make engaging entertainment with anything if you put your mind to it. I would read picture books before bed and even in the back of the car. I was the only first grader being sent home with second grade reading material, my teacher sending a note to inform my parents of this. It made me feel special. My dad would listen to a lot of classic rock, which no doubt jump-started my interest in older music, and the evolution of music in general. I bet everybody has been influenced by mass media in some way, whether they recognize it or not, but I think mass media has done more than influence me, it's made me. By middle school, I had already delved into more mature books, older films, and especially the realm of YouTube. To this day, in my free time, I continue to look at media from past decades with a closer eye. It being from a different era is enough to interest me, but something about it resonates with me more than media today, and I've never been able to exactly pinpoint what about it does. As I research more about the decades and the broadcasts from it, I've been trying to detect a pattern. The average person doesn't often study media and just accepts it as an everyday part of life. The only pattern people seem to realize nowadays is fake news, but it's not like they can explain what made the old news so much better, and that's not to deny that it is fake, but there has to be a reason why, and it goes beyond that. I see the entire media landscape as different. This isn't exactly the same mass media as when I was growing up as a kid, you know, the mass media that made me want to get into this field one way or another, but what do I know? It's been evolving over the course of time, and I'm sure each past generation felt the same about a new generation's mass media experiences. But I know there's something I, as well as others, personally desire about a more retro era. I want to explore what makes people want to retreat back to such a golden age. People always say the music, the shows, the movies, the environment all around was better back then. You see comments like this on music videos all the time. Take me back in a time machine, where is it? I want to go back to the 80s, the 90s, the 50s, etc. I guarantee you'll find a comment like that. But during those times there was also controversial wars, racism, corruption. Not much different from today, is it? You don't look at old news broadcasts on internet archives and see people wishing to go back there. You just see it on old landmarks of pop culture, and that's when they wish they could go back. It's more of a cultural thing rather than a social thing. But what exactly made it so appealing, and can it be found anywhere today? By the early 1900s, the radio was out, a new force to be reckoned with. It started out as something workers on ships and airplanes used to improve communication, but inevitably found its way into the homes of everyday citizens. This invention was used to entertain people with radio programs or to hear the latest updates during the Great Depression or World War II. But soon, it was time to hear from more people and see it too. TV found its way into the homes of many Americans, with CBS, NBC, and ABC dominating the airwaves with new sitcoms, talk shows, and news programs. Though experimental, television was limited this time, only being able to do things live. A show like Playhouse 90 suffered from this. You'd have to repeat a program for a different time zone afterwards. But in 1956, the advent of videotape happened, leading to the recording and rerunning of broadcasts. Despite this, Hollywood was finally able to get audiences coming back to the movies in droves again too, with extravagant motion pictures and more relaxed drive-ins to feature B-movies. Though TV had taken over, radio, newspapers, and novels were still going strong, and at this point there were only more innovations and revelations to be had. By 1960, almost every household in America had a TV. The entire country was able to see Nixon sweat up a storm during a debate with Kennedy, teens become obsessed with the Beatles and the Ed Sullivan Show, and a boatload of Western sitcoms and dramas hit the small screen. The entire country also got to see Nixon come back to use television as his aid.
Sock it to me?
They also got the latest news of the tumultuous late 60s, the Teenage Rebellion, the Vietnam War, and the Civil Rights Movement. Putting that aside though, the late 60s also brought Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and Sesame Street to people's homes, where they could be educated and entertained, using the powerful medium for good, and they got to see a man land on the freaking moon. If only JFK had lived to see that feat pulled off. And something we'll analyze even further with the following couple of decades, advertisements coming into their own, the way we know them now. With TV shows, whether they be variety or late-night sitcoms or children's programming, they all managed to find their footing, or their winning formula by this point. Commercials, however, were only beginning to find their structure the way we know them now. Whereas ads of the 50s were short and sweet, just trying to get the name out there with a quick joke or a bit of animation, the 60s stepped it up a notch in terms of developed ads. It may not have been obvious at first, like this mid-60s ad which follows the exact template of a 50s ad.
America's best-selling, best-tasting filter cigarette. It still tastes good like a cigarette should.
Now they had characters, a lot of which would interact with the audience in some way, and if they didn't, they would feature common folk. They would star regular, average-looking people. Charmin, for example, featured a female shopper who just loved squeezing the toilet paper rolls, and in comes Mr. Whipple, who would go on to become a well-known figure, saying that he can't deny it himself. A slightly exaggerated, although very grounded commercial. Commercials evolved into more exaggerated pieces of media than this, but the roots were kept the same. Appeal to the viewers, speak to them, look like them, act like them, talk like them, but make it entertaining. Spark some sort of interest in your product, which led to the fun, exaggerated factor. By the 70s, TV was inescapable. It was a necessity. People needed to be informed on major events, and if it wasn't that, kids needed to be informed on how to read or count from PBS. TV was becoming immensely popular as an at-home teaching tool, and because of this massive media takeover, the FCC finally started cracking down. The FCC was established to monitor wire and radio communications back in 1934, but primarily became known for TV as time went on. TV was becoming the go-to media channel, so it was inevitable for people to start experimenting with what they could and couldn't get away with. In 1978, FCC vs. Pacifica stated that no swearing could be heard during the daytime. TV was also watched with some scrutiny. The FCC definitely has significance in this whole mass media ordeal. They're hindering someone's message in one form or another, whether it be censoring, limiting, or blocking altogether. The major effects of this sanitation of sorts snowballs into a bigger problem later on, but at this point in time, no audience really knew or noticed this behind-the-scenes stuff. The FCC also enforced family hours on 3 major networks in 1975. They wanted shows that had a wide appeal and could accumulate a wide variety of happy advertisers.
We can show my pregnancy.
And John Boy can have VD.
Plus a quick vasectomy.
After 9 o'clock. These are the days.
Shows like All in the Family were discouraged, but Happy Days was more than A-OK. It wasn't until 1 year later that the Writers Guild of America deemed it illegal, saying it was blatant censorship, inhibited creativity, and had a chilling effect on the free flow of ideas. But by this point, a new structure was formed, so the networks just sort of kept it going. It made audiences happy, it made advertisers happy, it was a win-win. Channels had their own recognizable slate of shows, their marketing campaigns down, and ratings kept them relevant. Families all around the country would gather in front of their color televisions to learn about current events or be entertained by programming. Though it was no longer instilled, I guess the networks thought that a universal appeal could finally be achieved after a decade of drugs, rebellion, and controversy. Though these types of shows and commercials were pleasant then and are nostalgic to so many Gen Xers and baby boomers today, it shows how easy a message can become diminished or diluted. There are also instances that show how sneaky and subtle producers and advertisers can get when they're forced into a corner and they're forced to keep a certain image. The 3 major networks adopted their own form of children's programming to host, famously on Saturday mornings. Now shows and commercials and music at the end of the day are just products, albeit unique and well put together products. But they're products, and there's only so much the FCC can control or look over, especially if no complaints are garnered towards it. If people don't make a noise about a show or radio moment, it may fly under the radar. And some things, particularly during the 70s, weren't really worth getting upset about, and interestingly became part of the norm.
The seamlessness of animation in animated programs, especially for my age group, Saturday mornings, but with the animated commercials as well. We're animated and somehow people don't notice that it's a commercial and are singing along just like they would with the Scooby-Doo song. The one that strikes me the most in that was, oddly enough, in the 70s, there were even beer commercials that were animated as if to market to 11-year-olds. You can still find those online now, but they were shown on Saturday mornings, and that kind of confusion between what is an adult and what is a child product, they were trying to recruit us at 11 for something they knew we couldn't do until we were 21.
From the land of sky blue waters, from the land of pine's lofty blossoms, from the beer refreshing. Pour an ice-cold Hamm's and treat yourself to the premium beer from the land of sky blue waters. Great tasting Hamm's. Hamm's, the beer refreshing. Hamm's, the beer refreshing. Hamm's.
Back before I started Oddity Archive, I'd lost my job and I was just at home all the time, sitting around on the computer, kind of, watching my brain rot away. But I started watching a lot of old off-air stuff on YouTube, and I knew I still had a whole ton of tapes that I'd recorded in the 90s and 2000s, and I was starting to pull those out. And I realized that each one's kind of its own little moment in time. Excuse me. From there, you can really pick out the stuff that you can't get anywhere else. You get those commercials that may very well have been lost, and a lot of times my personal favorite, the real cheap local ones. And so I guess that's kind of it. It's just it's as pure as you can get. It's unfiltered. It's a direct look right there at that time, right in the face.
The 80s definitely had a lighter feel to them overall. With this universal appeal achieved, cross-marketing could now work. Ham's Beer is an example in which it came across as awkward, but with the implementation of more family and kid-oriented shows, advertisers could find a way to have their products appeal to both. They got closer, or at least felt it. They felt personable and had a happier tone to them. You could see pieces of this at the end of the 70s though, with Be a Pepper and other ad campaigns striving to prove how literally anybody could enjoy their product, as a way to bring people to their side. If you don't think this product is for you, it is, and come on, you have to be like all these other people, join us!
And the taste is making peppers everywhere I go. There's greeting peppers, eating peppers, choir peppers, shire peppers. Wouldn't you like to be a pepper too? There's winning peppers, spinning peppers, non-peppers, fun peppers. Wouldn't you like to be a pepper too? Be a pepper, drink Dr. Pepper. Be a pepper.
I notice how so many feature people talking to the camera as if they're speaking directly to the audience and no one else. And this would continue on until even the early 2000s or so. It's employing a common trope of kids shows, where the host speaks directly to the young kid watching. In a way, this is the equivalent for an adult. Plus, these ads were always grounded in some sort of reality. I'm saying this very loosely, of course, as kids' ads were more fantastical and adventurous, but even those had a common setting, typically a kid's house, and featured commonly seen people such as a parent figure, and included a common trait among kids, such as daydreaming. Specifically, daydreaming that they were the heroes of their playtime and it could be controlled by them. What kid didn't ever think about how cool it'd be for their favorite TV show characters or action figures to be real? And don't say nobody, because if you do, I'll guide you to the initial inception and continued success of the Toy Story franchise.
It's really fun to take a look at even the advertising on boxes, because it still holds true to this day that the eyesight of the characters on cereal boxes are geared toward a child's level. So you'll see lots of eyes looking up, whether it's the Honey Smacks guy or the Cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Is that a bird of some sort? But they're always trying to engage the child.
You can also look at how they showed Barbie. Sure, it's somewhat narrowcasted towards girls, but in the same way G.I. Joe was aimed at boys. As opposite genders, we had to sit through these types of commercials, so might as well play to the strengths of advertising, and boy did they. It was sort of like a child fetishization, an ideal fantasy where this is all yours. In a way, Playskool might have even shaped the way kids thought about jobs, presenting an air cargo playset like the coolest toy, and presenting it in a way that may or may not have been subtle. And that way was, hey, this could be your job one day.
Now Federal Express takes off again with cargo for Phoenix, New York, Miami. The Federal Express air cargo playset comes with everything you see here.
And brands tried to act like your friends in a non-desperate way, which worked. The jingles definitely helped too, very nice sounding, simple, and catchy enough. You can definitely see how their down-to-earth approach was very effective. Sure, there's a Coke ad where football players are all sipping a Coke and singing the jingle on a bench, but that's still a football game, not some overblown event. It's just a very relatable event. McDonald's without a doubt nailed this, though. They tackled everything that kids and parents alike deal with, or have dealt with before. Kodak tried to market towards families and keeping memories alive, but that had no meaningful range compared to what scenarios McDonald's tackled. They showed kids struggling with homework or having to say goodbye to a friend. They showed teens having to deal with their first day of school or seeing a younger sibling grow up in front of their eyes. They showed parents having to catch their daughter's piano recital, having to drive them to McDonald's where a bunch of other boys will be, or even realizing that they may not see their daughter enough and they must remember the joy of having a daddy's girl relationship before it's too late. Yes, this is coming from a corporation, but tell me this doesn't tug at your heartstrings in some way, especially the ending.
Yes, I'll have a cheeseburger, fries.
And a sundae?
Yeah.
Deserve a break today.
At McDonald's.
These aren't messages about news or fictional stories told in faraway worlds, but sometimes the message of here's who we are and I hope you can see us in this light can be just as important and memorable. While brands were trying to figure out how to definitively market to people, major entertainers had to change the way they originally did. When MTV became an overnight sensation, music videos were all the craze for the latest singles. If you were an artist and wanted to reach the top of the charts, you needed a memorable video. At first, you just needed any video. Seriously, take Pat Benatar for example. Her first video on the channel was You Better Run. It was just simply her and the band performing in a warehouse. And then a year later comes Shadows of the Night, a music video with additional cast members featured and a plotline about fighting Nazis. And of course, popular media venues of the 80s can't be talked about without at least mentioning the rise of Blockbuster. Before Blockbuster, home videos would cost a good chunk of change, so more often than not, your family had a lot of blank VHS or Betamax tapes to record your favorite programs and movies. Now I know their commercial use was to tape programs when you weren't home, but come on, if you had a subscription service like HBO airing one of your favorite films multiple times, and you can't afford to pay for an official copy, you would definitely want to take it off them, especially since it's not edited and there are no commercial breaks. It's as good as a real copy.
I don't think one would have done it. I'm gonna go out and buy some more.
Sometimes you couldn't catch a certain movie, sometimes you didn't know what to watch, sometimes you didn't want to wait for it to end up on HBO. In comes Blockbuster with their thousands of titles to choose from. The way people consumed mass media in the 1980s couldn't have seemed more ideal. You got so many options in terms of network and ad messages, so many options in programming on major networks alone, and so many options to watch and save these pieces of media. Did anyone think that these things would actually ever disappear?
Around big fight up in the lunchroom the other week.
There it is. Violence at NBC, GE Com. I mean,
well, Allison should know.
What is internet anyway?
Internet is.
In 1996, Bill Clinton signed the Telecommunications Act of 1996 into law. This meant that corporations could now go into any field of media they wanted to, cross-promotion, cross-advertising, and cross-production on all platforms, a win-win for private parties, aka the shareholders. There were no restrictions on what type or how many media platforms like radio or TV they could own. Also, the internet is a thing now, and a potential mass media threat, so it's the first Telecommunications Act to involve it. The act lets the internet be fair game for corporations. Now, when you look on the FCC's website, they say the goal of this new act was to let anyone enter any communications business, to let any communications business compete in any market against each other. Please tell me that raises just as many concerns for you as it does to me. When they're talking about competition, they're talking about money. Money's always involved. And how do you make money? You'd think it'd be about the legit news stories or the personality in your lineup of hosts and artists. At one point perhaps, but certainly not anymore. To make money, you need commercial value. You need advertisers to feel confident in your platform. And by having eye-catching headlines on your 24-hour news network or clickbait headlines on your online article, you get views. Advertisers want views, so they'll allow themselves on those channels and sites. What if you don't have anything to say? You make something to say, of course. You get a lot of filler, a lot of celebrity fluff pieces, and a lot of word-on-the-street type of stories. Enter TMZ, a news program, which I hate to even call it, completely on tabloid, over-exaggerated stories where they just flash a camera to a celebrity somewhere, like Weird Al in the airport or James Woods in his car. They try to create a story by provoking them, like about Prince and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez respectively. Shows like Entertainment Tonight and Access Hollywood also seem like a result of this act. It's true that Entertainment Tonight premiered over a decade before, but even so, the show post-Telecommunications Act shows a much weaker structure and shows less purpose of existing than it did pre-Telecommunications Act.
Marriage is over as his wife files for legal separation. We have the papers.
Plus, our pick for the best and worst dressed stars of the week.
With this competition, everyone has their hand in news programs. It's inevitable and even quite necessary. But if there's so much news, how will people choose where to go or who to trust? Well, it doesn't matter really. It's not about getting a story anymore, it's about making one. The news division for the first time ever was expected to make a profit, just as much as the entertainment division would. For the longest time, news was always that division that was just supposed to be written off, as getting juicy stories involved the investing of resources, time, and money. If you can't tell, that all changed. And why do you think you don't hear about stories like the repeal of net neutrality until the day it's been repealed? It means internet providers can slow down access to whatever site they want, and even go one step further by indirectly forcing you to use the sites under their belt. It was an ongoing debate for months, and the only time I ever saw it covered on the news was the day it got officially repealed. It's because they're too hesitant to look into these issues and scandals, because that might involve controversy, and that's something advertisers don't want. So all you get is simplified, surface-level looks at stories until it snowballs too big for the details to be ignored. Mainstream media, TV, internet, radio, are all problematic, focusing on what's happening rather than why it's happening, focusing on what they should choose rather than why they're choosing it.
Guitar strings, titles, sound effects, and graphics everywhere. Breaking news each minute in the rush to get on air. With scandals, dramas, tragedies, and mindless ballyhoo that's turned our brains to goo.
That leaves us to where we are now, the 2000s. It was at this time something brilliant was realized. the concept of choice. That is to say, if networks aren't allowing or producing something you want on the air, you don't have to consume it. Affiliate stations became worried of getting their broadcasting license revoked by the FCC after the 2004 Super Bowl wardrobe malfunction. They didn't want to be attached to anything risky anymore. They no longer wanted to take risks. Everything officially became homogenized. There are no underdogs anymore. It's near impossible for someone quiet to make their voice heard on mainstream media. It's near impossible for a story to be covered completely without bias on mainstream media. It's near impossible for an ad to be repeated on national television that carries a thought-provoking or even worthwhile message.
I think they're memorable to them, and that's the appeal, that's the intention. Be the weirdest out there, you make it the most memorable, and all you need to do is look back at award-winning Super Bowl ads, right? For some of that. But on the other hand, when I think of Super Bowl ads, the ones that have been most successful are those that are perceived as expressing shared values, right? Whether it was right after 9/11 happened, but those don't get the replay, right, of the one-off, the strange, the let's make it memorable. They're great and they seem to work on a very temporary basis, but it's not the campaign they choose to run consistently. Given they know what they're doing, there must be something to it where they're not seeing that kind of appeal as effective as just getting the product in our memory.
Meanwhile, you can't even go to a Blockbuster anymore. Netflix ate up all their competition and now dominates. They're the go-to sites of shows and movies, but once again, think about this. This is all due to choice, the consumer making a choice.
We played Monopoly. It was quite simple. The rules were in the lid. And today's children have Mario Brothers, and there ain't no rules. And they make it up as they go along. And you have to have media that matches those people, otherwise you miss the boat. Because everything in the future is for me.
And here's where retro has a bit of competition: social media, getting message out there in the most direct way possible. The internet is not within the FCC's policing range. This also applies to YouTube, a site featuring viral videos and absurd humor that influenced my teenage years, for better or worse. For the most part though, I have nothing but praise for this site, as I came across so many fresh faces, new perspectives, and topics I may not have known about otherwise. One of these was Oddity Archive, interestingly enough. The first video I ever saw from Ben's channel was the Max Headroom incident, the first video he ever posted. I saw channels like this as the underdog, getting a message out there under the radar, but still delivering it to an audience just as valuable as any one that could be achieved from TV.
And welcome to the first edition of the Oddity Archive, a show where we look at the bizarre, the obsolete, and to a lesser degree nostalgic areas of TV, music, film, and technology, primarily spanning from the 1970s through the 90s. So, when I started Archive, I wasn't working, and I was starting to spend way too much time on YouTube, as I mentioned, and I was watching stuff like The Angry Video Game Nerd and The Nostalgia Critic. And I liked those shows, and they were kind of in that zone for me, that kind of 80s, 90s comfort zone. But it got me thinking back to some of the stuff that I remembered, and I guess I'm just the weird kid. Fox isn't, enough to go by. But it just got me thinking back on that stuff that either intrigued or scared me or what have you. And nobody else was discussing it, and I had nothing else to do, and Archive just kind of tumbled out of that.
And of course, because of YouTube's success, TV has tried to invade this too. TV networks upload clips or even full episodes of their shows on there. Sure, you could argue it's a good way to preserve the episode, but it becomes worse when you realize that these clips are structured and designed for viewing on YouTube and Instagram now rather than TV. Plugs and advertisers have reformatted their campaigns. Even now, there are ads you cannot escape on YouTube and full-frame ads on Instagram. Plus, so many celebrities like The Rock, Jack Black, Will Smith, and Reese Witherspoon, to name a handful, became instant YouTube celebrities because of their already successful film careers. They're taking the limelight away from the everyman that was meant to benefit. YouTube itself officially died, in a way, when the tagline "Broadcast Yourself" was dropped from their ads and their homepage. Even though it's more popular now than ever, and it's still an incredible tool for informing and entertaining, it became homogenized. It no longer had the distinct nature to it that once made it a threat to the mainstream media. For as much as the mainstream media has painted YouTube as a threat, like PewDiePie being a Nazi, they sure do love plugging their stuff on it. They have gotten their piece of the pie now, and they're not going to share for any newcomers. YouTube shows have even gotten their own TV show. One is The Annoying Orange, another is Fred, but those are much older examples. One I'd like to mention is recent. It's called Ryan's Mystery Playdate. It's a show based on Ryan's world. He's amassed over 24 million subscribers, and he's a kid. Okay, well, he's not the one controlling the channel, it's his parents. I personally believe that the parents milking their kid when he probably doesn't even know what he's doing is bad enough, but to put him on TV and to serve as executive producers on one of the worst kid shows I've ever seen is is bringing this to a whole new level. It's mindless, it's brainless, it's vapid, it's void of any semblance of narrative or effort. It's everything shows like Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, or even Blue's Clues were against. It treats kids like idiots. It props Ryan up to be this perfect, can't do anything wrong kid. Even when he fails at throwing pizzas or something, he still somehow gets points, he still somehow wins. He never gets pie in the face, or slimed, or anything else quote-unquote comical. And it's not even like it's a game show. It's literally just one setup to another setup. Like, watch Ryan do one thing, and watch his parents say something silly in response. It doesn't ask kids to do anything productive. It's not like I need all kids shows to have audience participation. Shows like Bob the Builder didn't require this, but shows like Bob the Builder, Thomas the Tank Engine, or even Arthur treated their young audiences with some amount of respect and showed them life situations through a compelling narrative. Even shows like Lazy Town or The Wiggles had colorful characters and catchy tunes to get by. Ryan's Mystery Playdate has none of that. It feels so corporate. This is not only one of the worst kids shows I've ever put myself through watching, even if it was only one episode, or even one of the worst modern shows I've seen. It's just one of the worst shows I've ever seen, period. It's despicable and it's cynical. It's what's become of TV nowadays. At best, TV is bland. In one ear, out the other. At worst, it's almost offensively bad. Channels like Boomerang are no longer the juggernaut for old nostalgic shows like they used to be. They've since gone commercial, Boomerang in one case by actually adding commercials. They feature modern cartoons and are more of a Cartoon Network 2.0, something Ted Turner was initially against, but now doesn't matter. To give a little credit, they do feature older cartoons, but not at the most ideal time slots. 4 p.m. or 8 p.m., I would be watching Dexter's Lab, The Flintstones, Banana Splits, Tom and Jerry, versus now where they show older shows at 11 p.m. or 3 a.m. Who's watching? Boomerang is not the worst offender though, it's just the most disappointing one. It's just the most disappointing fall. And as far as kids' entertainment goes, the internet doesn't offer much better. In fact, I'd almost call it worse. A lot of videos featuring children are one filmed by parents, I already mentioned Ryan's World. But there are parents that are just truly horrible human beings. One case is the Daddy-O-5 channel, where the parents straight up physically and psychologically abuse their children through cruel pranks, all for views. There are also videos I cannot believe parents let their children watch, like the infamous Elsagate videos, the Peppa Pig Minion compilations. They're all cheaply rendered children's sing-along videos that are borderline disturbing and capitalize on famous children's stories, nursery rhymes, and trends. Some have me at a loss for words.
Mama called the doctor and doctor said, no more hugs, jumping on the rock.
So I honestly fear what parents may be letting their kids watch if they're not cautious or keeping an eye on them. Kids nowadays are also swayed by social media, even if they're too young for it, and ideas can hatch in their minds to do stupid things. I think back to when I was a kid. Not to say every show or channel was perfect and led me to be a better person, but there was a lot more care and effort put into those shows and channels. I loved media, I was influenced by it, I wanted to learn from it, and I can't help but think how differently I would have felt had I been raised in the age of TV and internet we're in right now. I continually look back on the type of ads I had to watch as a kid. Ads were not my favorite thing, admittedly, but honestly, who could say that they're anybody's favorite? But the older I get, the more appreciation I learn to have for them. The Credit Report commercials are some of the most beloved, and looking at them today, I realize how clever they were. They were like those cheesy Cheerios or Mentos jingles, except they would actually change style and lyrics from time to time. And they always related, such as one about a guy living in his girlfriend's basement because their credit score was bad. That's hilariously fitting. It's an update on a common commercial trend that worked for years. And yeah, I didn't know what bundling home and auto insurance meant, but Progressive still got that message out there with Flo, a mascot that was the 2000s equivalent of Mr. Whipple for Charmin. But nowadays, if they do include Flo, it's for awkward parodies. Liberty Mutual makes weird skits, which, while occasionally so dumb they're amusing, are not a step in the right direction. There's potential here to make it interesting, but the direction of writing is so flat and simplistic. And if you like any of these ads I've mentioned so far, or the ones I'm going to mention, that's fine. That's fine, everybody sees media differently. But you have to understand how down in quality I think they've gone when compared to ones of a more retro era.
One thing I think that has come to dominate, that I think we could almost call the Old Spice effect, is the idea of just being so out there and weird that you stop and want to watch it. Whether in a lot of insurance companies clearly do this, right? They're really not selling anything in those ads as much as reminding you of their name. As a way so that there's that name recognition, right? And to me, I think that's the most surprising thing is weird now rules. And so it's almost like we've gotten into the post-weird era of where nothing is strange, nothing is odd anymore. And we're not trying to laugh anymore, we're just trying to shock.
Old ads and programs usually contain a decent amount of pathos, family, friends, relatable situations, albeit with a slight touch of the fantastical. And they're usually aimed at a general boy-girl crowd or a general family crowd, featuring normal people in somewhat normal, relatable situations. Nowadays, commercials even struggle to retain a relatable situation. They're more absurdist, or the equivalent of a parody SNL commercial. And they have a clear production value with lots of visual effects and celebrity flair, which keeps the message very distant from the average television or internet watcher. Sure, these commercials have the power to make people laugh, but what do they really take away from them? More emphasis is put on the punchline than the product. You may see what they're trying to show you, but you won't associate a feeling or idea with it. Even the slogans seem more simplistic than before. How do you go from "Wouldn't you like to be a pepper" to "It's the sweet one"? What a downgrade! It doesn't help that they're more detached from us than ever, creating overblown scenarios and not speaking to the camera or inviting us to obtain this knowledge like before. It's like its own short film where the product they want you to buy coincidentally happens to have a quick cameo. Not to mention how Wendy's in some ways changed the social media advertising game, with my modern interpretation of them falling more in line with Jeff Ross from the Comedy Central roast than a fast food joint. And seeing brand accounts tweet and interact with each other like work buddies on Twitter has simply become part of the norm.
And I wonder if it would correspond with a movement away from cable toward streaming devices. I think there's probably a discoverable point of viewership shifting where once you move from live television and the inability to interrupt and move forward in time or move backwards to review a scene, I think that's where you're going to see commercials start changing, right? Because now it knows you're not going to watch the whole thing. That's why I think some of those values-based ones still work during the Super Bowl, because it's a rarity, honestly, of an event that people still want to watch in real time, live with other people, right? Versus programming where I would guess the majority of people don't watch the commercials because we don't have to watch the show live. So with our DVRing, with our streaming, we're skipping through as much as possible so they know they've only got a second. And in that second, what can they do? They can go ahead and make the name memorable.
You see Geico, and you may remember it's for car insurance, but what you remember most is the get-go, or the fact that Pinocchio got a parking ticket. They've gone so far out of their way to make sure the audience is entertained that the product that they're selling gets lost in the mix. The only reason I remember the message anymore is due to the frequency of these ads' appearances, not the message itself. And in addition to that, so many advertisers are trying to leech off the success and notoriety of these ads that they themselves become bland. All approaches to commercials are similar in how safe, predictive, and repetitive they've become. Typically 1.78 to 1 for comedic ones, and 2.35 to 1 for serious ones. Even the connotation of a mascot like Ronald McDonald or a simple jingle felt more innocent and personal than anything nowadays, even if they were a little manipulative. All I see now are celebrities, quick references, or simply offbeat jokes. Hey, I recognize the DeLorean. That's not to say every commercial with modern marketing behind it sucks. Some are just better executed than others. For example, if we're talking about this last Super Bowl, I enjoyed the Groundhog Day themed Jeep commercial. I think I liked it not only because the movie is one of my favorites, but because it was only one reference. They only referenced the movie and remade certain scenes and got a few of the actors back to make the Jeep part of the ad. More care and cleverness was put into tying the product with the ad than most of the others I've seen. The Doritos one had Sam Elliott in the West dancing to Old Town Road. Gee, how long did it take a staff to concoct that?
I always love it when I can find off-air recordings. And then you can really see the change. And to me, it's devolved, actually. Even though we have more choices and things are a lot more efficient now, the way I see it is the farther back you go, there were more different, I guess you could say today programs, but, you know, different technology. And everybody had their own little stamp, their own little way of doing things, and it was a lot more individual. And somewhere down the line, it became more homogenized. And I would say probably the late 80s is when that really started. And today, unless it's a really cheap, bad local commercial or something, there's very little difference in my eyes, you know, between different advertising and TV shows, movies, and so on. It's just kind of become, as I said, homogenized to me.
But the exposure to these short films and posts can also hurt a cause or damage it beyond belief. Political ads and others from big companies, especially if they're designed with an online marketing tactic, will inevitably frustrate the very people they're trying to sell to, and even those they aren't. Ads like these are spammed everywhere, throughout every crevice of the media world. And usually because there's no restrictions with online ads as compared to TV ads, they don't need to be constrained by 30 seconds. They can be 15 seconds if they want to, or as long as 5 or 6 minutes. But people see and hear them so constantly that they get annoyed by the product, even if they don't really know what it is. Kids learned about Mike Bloomberg's campaign after it seeped into YouTube and Instagram. He tried too hard to make his campaign a viral one, and it backfired massively. The only thing his campaign served in the end was to show how not to do a campaign in the future.
Bloomberg, as a case in point, is there a market he's not trying to reach?
He's trying to do Instagram meme accounts, apparently.
Absolutely, and so he's reaching out in every venue possible to every person possible, and that just doesn't seem like it seems like a very expensive approach, but it doesn't seem that, but what do I know? What surprises me even is in conversations with my kids about the election, I did have my now 10-year-old ask the question, what about Mike? Which I just wanted to put my head through a pane of glass. The fact that he's seen enough of those ads that he's now referring to candidate who has joined the race very late by only his first name because of the jingoism of advertising means I don't know how many ads he's been exposed to, and he's primarily a YouTube watcher. Complete disgust with the amount of money that's gone into that kind of marketing. So I think if I'm seeing that as a misfire and a backfire, quite honestly, I'm sure generationally I'm not alone.
In this day and age of rampant digital media and rampant lack of emotion, as well as controversy in mass media, what remnants can you find of the retro world? Well, of course, you can still find a radio in your car, but those aren't exactly the most popular. Most people would rather stream Spotify in their car because, once again, they have a choice. And many have Spotify Premium, so they don't even need to listen to ads. So much choice controlled by them. Meanwhile, some have all the choice while seemingly having no choice and no control. That is, if they have young kids.
But the reality of having 3 little kids right now means that if I'm in the car trying to listen to NPR or sports radio or something like that, I'm quickly, right now it's Frozen 2 soundtrack, and demanded that I turn on something good. So it is hard to consume really anything that I want while I'm in the car. I used to be a major, I would listen to 780 a lot, WBBM, I listened to ESPN 1000, listen to The Score, NPR. But yeah, less of that is happening these days.
Newspapers are still around, but not a lot of people still have a subscription to one due to social media being a form of news. In an excerpt from Young People and the Future of News, a 17-year-old claimed that journalism is dead. That's in reference to legacy news, or news organizations that existed before the era of social media, and they still exist today in forms of websites, television, radio programs, and printed news. This teenager went on to say, I don't really go out of my way to look for news stories, I just see whatever pops up. I have an app on my phone that has the news stories from different websites. And another teenager agreed that Twitter is almost like the news. They said if a story was important, it would find them. But both newspapers and social media, the latter especially, are susceptible to the infamous term known as fake news. News that's exaggerated or a flat-out lie. Depending on what type of person you ask, they'll strongly believe in it or just simply acknowledge its existence. Fake news cannot in theory be 100% fake in my opinion. The root of the story has some truth in it, but the problem is when it gets distilled, overblown, or just twisted along the way to fit a channel's narrative or to something suitable for a clickbait headline. If people don't at least look into their sources or look beyond the story they're given, this could continue on for years. If mainstream media of any political or social bias is willing to spit out something incorrect, then social media, arguably a more creative outlet, can potentially be more out there and misleading.
I don't necessarily think fake news is a problem so much as misinformation. People often are keen to take whatever information they're given right off the bat, sometimes without kind of thinking about where it's coming from or what it implies.
I'm one of the only people I know that reads an actual physical newspaper every day. I'm driven by just awareness, knowing what's going on in the world. So I have this love both for fiction and nonfiction. So I thought if I could help to instill that in kids today who I think are so easily swayed by, recency, what's entertaining by headlines as they scroll through social media. I thought if I could help to just sort of instill this cultural, political, societal awareness that comes from journalism, I thought I could see a lot of value to doing that. I had a lot of meaning to what I do on a daily basis. Obviously, this is just a hunch, but I do think our acute awareness these days to fake news, and our awareness that it's just so we have to be so conscientious as consumers. I do hope that it is sort of leading to this as students get older and older, they come up in this era of fake news, and that they start to learn what it means to be conscientious consumers of news and realize that as a reader you can't just take what's given to you and accept it as truth, but you have to fact check, you have to check the credibility, that you have to make actual steps to decipher what's real and what's not. And those lines between what is truthful and what's not, what is slanted in one direction versus what's truly objective, is just becoming blurrier and blurrier as time goes on. But as long as people are constantly asking questions of what they read and pursuing truth and not just nodding their heads in acceptance, I do honestly at least have hope that this whole heightened awareness to fake news and propensity of fake news that exists in our society might, in the long run, end up being a good thing for a more just aware, everyday citizen who's more of an active participant in reading and taking in news wherever they get it, because they're at least aware of the likelihood that what they read might not be completely objective, if that's what they're seeking. Yeah, I will continue to hopefully instill in them the value of paper books as they get older, news, and not because that's the only way to take in media, but you should be able to take in media, I think, and consume in a variety of different ways, and not just be pigeonholed into one area.
Something that has been gaining traction though is Family Video, the fastest growing movie and rental chain nowadays. They've been around since 1978 technically, but ever since Blockbuster narrowed themselves down to one single store, literally, Family Video has picked up an incredible amount of steam, tapping into the nostalgic warmth consumers have deep down about renting back in the analog days, scanning hundreds of titles, taking a chance on movies and games, and then pacing through the aisles to find about 100 more DVDs and Blu-rays to choose from. I wanted to learn more about the mindset customers have, and while there's a lot of news clips and articles to look at, those aren't as personal and are edited down to the same reasons. People like to physically hold stuff is repeated every single time. I wanted to learn about experiences and backgrounds of a variety of customers. I even had the idea to make a trip out to one and interview some people that walked in since there wasn't one near my house. But due to circumstances, this never came to fruition, and so in an ironic move, I took to modern media, social media to be specific, Twitter to be even more specific, to get the word out on my initiative. I tagged Family Video in the tweet, and within a few minutes their account quote tweeted me, spreading it to their much wider audience than my measly 30 followers or so. And by the end of that night alone, I received several fantastic responses. On top of that, I received several more in the following days and weeks. Since these people did direct message me, I will keep their names and handles anonymous, but I wanted to show you the messages themselves. Fans of Family Video and video stores in general had a lot to say. They went over how the convenience of films and food in one place is nice, as many Family Video chains sell candy, popcorn, and even pizza, specifically Marco's Pizza. Just as I wanted, I got to dive into these people's backgrounds, such as growing up in the 90s and renting videos on a Friday night, and then having a son that gets so much joy from renting the same movie over and over again, just like I did when I was a kid. They also enjoy the face-to-face interactions with others about current movies and shows, something you can't do with a streaming service. I mean, when you think about it, one pro to sticking with physical is that streaming services only have so many shows and movies you want to watch at a single time. What was supposed to be a better alternative to television and potentially the movie-going experience, which I hope not, is more expensive and seemingly not as ideal. With a rental store, you only need to buy or rent a show once. From what I've been told, demographics tend to be mostly 30 and up, with younger folks around the 18 to 34 range interested in more newer titles, while middle-aged people and seniors will browse through the classics. There are some who will swear by physical media, while others like myself at least like the option of having both for convenience and the sake of atmosphere and nostalgia. Plus, choice can mean something different to everybody. Here's someone who thinks having a DVD collection bound by the title's own provides more choice than something the all-mysterious algorithm chooses for you. Sure, you're limited by what you own, but you have choice in what you truly want to consume. It really opened my eyes that sometimes the wide variety so many see as beneficial, including myself, don't always look that way to others. Others see this huge landscape of media content only for an all-mysterious algorithm to decide what they should watch based on popularity and their viewings of other media.
Part of it, I also feel like part of it is because we have like older movies that you're not going to find on Amazon Prime or at Redbox or anywhere, especially for 50 cents. I mean, so our prices are a lot cheaper, so our new releases are $3, so you can order on Amazon Prime for $6.99, or you can come here and pay $3 for it.
That's very true.
As far as maybe something like movies go, I do prefer hard copies. I don't like having to be stuck online if possible. I mean, the convenience of streaming is nice and all, but With the rights changes and all, sometimes it gets a little dodgy in terms of what you can get. So I always prefer having movies. I've got a whole, on this shelf behind me, if the camera were out farther, there's another shelf above it, and that's all Laserdiscs and CEDs. So I'm getting old school there. And I actually have a few DVDs that I'm kind of blocking right now that are in my to-be-watched pile, but I just haven't had time for them.
A robot telling me what to consume has so much less of a personal feeling to it. I myself would love to be able to rent nowadays, even though I have a huge Blu-ray DVD collection. While streaming is convenient, a video store is also convenient, and sometimes even more helpful and open. There are so many options always available, and I don't always have to worry about how long a film or show will be licensed out. I remember going to Blockbuster back in the mid-2000s on a Friday night to pick a movie to watch that following weekend. It's a shame that Blockbuster had to have their downfall, but even the fact that there's still only one around is crazy, and the even crazier part is that they're still getting business simply because they're the last one. The presence of a video store is one of those irreplaceable things, and I hope they can stay around as long as possible. Bookstores are also something I want to stick around for as long as possible. If you take away the renting a movie versus buying a book aspect, they are very similar and are endangered by the rise of ebooks. Though so many people still prefer physical books, 65% in fact, there is something about roaming the aisles for a book and physically holding it in your hand that keep you more engrossed than flipping the page on a tablet.
I wouldn't say that I hate ebooks. It's just I don't really utilize them. I'll always be a physical book person. I guess I shouldn't say always. I should be open-minded, but I can't imagine ever straying from that. I'm a fan because of my love for books. I could go into any bookstore, so I don't know how much it's a Barnes & Noble affinity necessarily as it is a bookstore thing. Barnes & Noble's close to my house, and so that's where I spend a lot of my time. I could spend hours just kind of wandering the aisles of a Barnes & Noble or any bookstore, picking up books, reading the back covers, looking into them, and honestly, I'm of the mind that I'm pretty much going to like any book that's out there. I can find some value in it. So Barnes & Noble is kind of a dangerous place for me. And now that I have kids, I'll go there on occasion to get them little kid stories, and I'll walk out with 10 books of my own. So I have far more books at my house right now than I probably have time to read, and a lot of that's because of Barnes & Noble.
Have you visited any independent bookstores or anything like that?
It's something I like to do when my family travels. Anytime we go anywhere out of town, that's something that I like to make a point to do. My favorite bookstore of all time is Arthur's, which is a small town bookshop in downtown Naperville where I grew up. So, but yeah, independent bookstores. I wish there were more of around here. I know there's one in downtown Geneva that people keep telling me to go to that I haven't had a chance to check out yet. So I can only imagine what it's going to be like when my 5, 3, and 1-year-old reach this age. But as they're growing up, yeah, I mean, every night we're reading physical books. We try to diminish the significance of the electronics, as I think all parents do. Not because they're bad, but I don't know. We like when I'm reading a story to Lucy and Eleanor, my 3 and 5-year-old daughters. We can stop and ask questions. I feel myself going into the literary analysis realm that I go into with my high school students, and yes, I realize how nerdy that is and stereotypical that is. But it just leads to questioning. It leads to them predicting. It leads to them actually engaging, as opposed to sort of mindlessly sitting and taking things in. It just leads to more dialogue and interaction.
Though I've made the argument that modern media is taking away our experience with retro media and replacing it with something worse, that's not the entire case necessarily. If anything, modern media can be extremely useful. Though our experience with retro media such as older ads, video stores, and independent bookstores are near extinction, those ads and memories themselves stick around.
I like that on the internet it's kind of a repository, if that's what you mean. Especially now that everybody kind of posts every little life thing to YouTube or social media, whatever, that hopefully it gives us plenty to draw on in the future.
There are official channels like the Museum of Classic Chicago Television, or even ones run by ordinary people like 80s Commercial Vault, that take VHS tapes from past TV viewers and upload them onto their channel for preservation purposes. Both channels were extremely useful in the research for this project. And for more quote-unquote important pieces of work, there's the U.S. National Archive YouTube channel as well. And even off of YouTube, archive.org keeps records of books, movies, broadcasts, music, and more. And just because our experience with those types of retro media may be becoming old-fashioned doesn't mean that all types are. Libraries and movie theaters still technically came from the traditional media age, yet have stuck around in pop culture to this day. And you have to put yourselves in the shoes of someone in the traditional media age sometimes. For example, literal film was flammable. Once its theatrical run was done, it might have been considered worthless, so it would be dumped in the Santa Monica Bay or put in a vault through warm temperatures where it sat until rotting away. Only so much preservation and restoration work could be done to deteriorated film decades later by groups such as the Film Foundation. Martin Scorsese and Clint Eastwood being two notable names amongst the board of directors. There were many studio lot fires that lost most of the silent era too, and even in the 2000s, art could be lost forever in an instant. The 2008 Universal Studios backlot fire lost a lot of archived videos and master tapes of UMG, Universal Music Group. With the internet or simply someone's hard drive, we can back up and safely preserve things, at least better than before. Maybe not in the highest quality possible, but definitely better than permanently losing it. We don't need to go fully digital, but there's at least less of a concern about how a certain filmography or discography will hold up physically over time.
Infinite nature of film versus there is only the depth of pixels, right? Pixels go down, you want to narrow in, you're only going to get so far, but a true film is infinite and restorable. Same questions are being asked in the recording industry. There were some masters of music I loved in the 90s that has now gone forever due to a fire because the masters were right on digital tape. But it is a risk we take when we have something in a format that is a single entity. I mean, it's the benefit of digital, I got it, the shareability, the manipulation available, but there is something to film, ultimately, right, that transcends that. In terms of depth.
And there are things we can do with modern media as a tool. If a brand does something we don't like, the power is in our hands to send criticism their way. They might even listen to us, or as Dominic does, use Twitter and Instagram to tweet or post reminders for students. And during COVID-19, it became increasingly clear that websites like Zoom are a fantastic way to reach students when you can't do it face-to-face.
Actually got on Twitter was because it was a grad school project when I was getting my master's. We had some options, but we basically had to prove for the sake of this one project that we were technologically hip. We had to use some contemporary means of social media to show that we were engaging with our students. And so I created a Twitter account for what I thought would just be a week to take screenshots and prove that I was using Twitter. And all I was using it for was like tweeting out assignment reminders and things like that to my students. It was pretty boring. But it was such a revelation to my students. They had never seen or imagined a teacher actually being on Twitter. That was totally student realm. That was not a place for teachers to go back then. So it led to all of a sudden me just having a lot of followers, and then students, everybody telling me like, no, you can't delete it. I'm like, don't. Why would you delete it after this project? You got to keep it going. And so then it became a means of showing students like what it's become now, where it's not just me tweeting out assignment reminders, which I do on occasion, but like I've tried to make it more creative and entertaining. Social media has provided a way for them to get to know me better. I always tell my students that I want to get to know them as people, and I don't just view them as my students. So I figure it should go both ways. And I think the biggest implications that I see is it helps to create this really cool, fun classroom atmosphere, because then they start to not just see me as just a literary analysis dude, but a real person.
And look, I think it's good that networks, providers, brands, and even schools and teachers have branched out to social media. It's a very effective tool to get the word out and can really improve the environment of a modern-day millennial or student. The internet has some genuinely great features to it. I think the problem is that the type of content regularly featured and promoted on it is not genuine and cannot replace the fuzzy look to a VHS tape, the atmosphere of a bookstore, or beat the messages gotten across in great investigative journalism pieces of the time. By trying to appeal to everybody in the safest way possible, it's hard for them to please anybody. Modern media has created a sense of convenience and has given us more of a voice than ever, whether it be getting out opinions or choosing opinions. We can sway influence over big companies, but big company voices continue to dominate and inform us. That's just the nature of the world. We gotta keep somebody in charge, in the same way we need a president instead of anarchy. But as we ourselves got the power to put passion in our messages, the brands have gotten more soulless. When they hide, manipulate, or don't articulate effectively to the masses, they are no longer fulfilling the duties we entrust them to do. It's like the president, to bring that example up again. We expect a little charm and charisma, but we don't want them to be meme lords for God's sake. There's appealing to the people, and then there's appealing to the culture. The latter is often not pulled off as well. We can find some quality retro media in this day and age, and there are always methods of seeking it out. The problem is that the internet is so controlled and sanitized now that people want to seek something that reminds them of a simpler time. But messages change over time, and we can no longer look to those old ads for guidance or what the company currently wants to say. We can study their tactics and learn from them. We can analyze what they got across at the time, how it affected people at the time, and if those methods and tricks could work on a more impressionable generation.
I think they're going to have to shift again, and they're going to have to re-establish who their market is. And I think particularly Gen Z right now is going to deal this and push advertising in different directions. Print could make a bit of a comeback in this regard. So could billboard. But I wonder if the future of commercial advertising is really going to change substantially.
That's up to the current generation. That's up to the ones that are coming of age right now, and see if they develop any kind of affinity for the past. Of course, with the internet, I swear nostalgia can mean 10 minutes ago. To me, it gets a little silly after a while. But I'd like to think that, maybe it won't be full-fledged resurgences, but, enough. Hopefully enough to just keep it going along and, have people learn from the past and take the best of it and carry it forward with them. So I'm trying to stay optimistic about that one. As far as what it means culturally right now, maybe, I guess I'm not really that big a fan, but I seem to exist in this weird little world where I'm always reevaluating the past, but I'm very interested in where we're going too, so I tend to have this constant push-pull thing happening. I don't know, my tastes seem to be back there. I try and keep an open mind to new stuff, but I always seem to find myself retreating to that.
And now, folks, it's time to say goodnight. We sincerely appreciate your patronage and hope we've succeeded in bringing you an enjoyable evening of entertainment. Please drive home carefully and come back again soon. Good night.